I had just landed in Oregon after a 3-day business trip in Denver, exhausted, but proud. I'd nailed a client pitch, signed our biggest deal of the quarter, and was genuinely looking forward to something rare: a peaceful family weekend. The annual Collins family party was tonight, and though things had been tense lately, I still believed in the idea of family. I even brought wine. But when I got to my house, my grandmother's house, the one I inherited legally and restored with my own hands, my key didn't fit. Confused, I tried again. Then I saw it. A brand new deadbolt. I called my mom. No answer. My brother. Nothing. Then a message lit up my phone screen. Locks changed. You have no home. I stared at it for a moment, then slowly smiled. They had no idea what I was holding. And they had just made a very big mistake. I grew up believing that family was sacred. Not perfect, never perfect, but something worth fighting for. My grandmother, Eleanor Collins, was the anchor of that belief. She lived in a cedar-shingled house by the Riverview River, filled with creaky floors, glass jars of wildflowers, and the scent of lemon soap. It was where I learned to braid my hair, where I cried over high school heartbreaks, and where she whispered stories about resilience passed down through generations of Collins women. She left that house to Minot, to my mother, not to my brother Derek, but to me. The will was clear. There were no legal ambiguities, no contested claims. She'd even written a letter explaining why. Avery sees the soul in this place. She understands what it holds. At the time, I thought the tension would pass. I believed my mother, Linda, would accept my inheritance, even if reluctantly. I offered compromises. You're always welcome, I told her. This house is still home to all of us. But she never really looked at it that way. Instead of accepting my stewardship, she treated it like a betrayal. My every renovation, every coat of paint, every fixed window was seen as a personal insult. Your grandmother liked that wallpaper, she'd snap, fingers brushing the fresh plaster. Derek stayed quiet, which somehow made it worse. Still, I held on. I paid the taxes. I refinanced my car loan to cover plumbing repairs. I hosted Thanksgiving, even when they criticized the menu. I tried truly to keep the peace. But peace was never the goal. I didn't see it then, but in hindsight, the signs were there. Whispers during family dinners, glances exchanged between my mother and Derek when I mentioned long-term plans for the house. The sudden curiosity about the deed. The offhand remark Mom made one night. This house has always belonged to the family, not just to one person. She didn't mean it as a reflection on legacy. She meant it as a warning. The irony is, I never wanted the house for its value. I wanted it because it was a living memory of the only person in my family who truly saw me. But I was the only one who felt that way. To the rest of them, it was real estate. History, with a price tag. When I flew to Denver for work, I didn't think twice about locking the door behind me. I had no reason to believe I wouldn't return to it, a hurt, a home. But now I know. They weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for the perfect moment to take everything. The family party had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. Every spring, we gathered uncles, cousins, in-laws, even neighbors who felt more like family than some actual blood relatives. It was always loud, chaotic, and oddly comforting. This year, it was being held at Uncle Ray's house, just outside of Riverview. I hadn't seen most of them in months, and after the success of my trip to Denver, I was actually looking forward to reconnecting. I even picked up my grandmother's favorite lemon cake from the bakery she used to love. My plan was simple: stop by my house, shower, change, maybe grab the photo album I'd promised to bring, then head to the party. I was still wearing a blazer and low heels, completely overdressed for a backyard gathering, but I didn't care. I felt light, triumphant, even. Until my key didn't work. At first, I thought it was the cold the lock sometimes stuck when the weather shifted. I jiggled the key, tried my spare, even crouched to check for damage, but something was off. Then I noticed the numbers on the lock, not just replaced but upgraded. A new smart deadbolt, one I had definitely not installed. My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone and called Mom. Straight to voicemail. Then Derek. Same. I tried one more time, listening to the unanswered ring echo in the quiet street. My pulse was rising, but I wasn't ready to panic. Not yet. That's when the text came through. Locks changed. You have no home. Mom. No greeting, no explanation. Just finality, cold as steel. I stood there in disbelief, thumb hovering over the screen, rereading the words until they blurred. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake maybe, a prank, a misfire, some dramatic joke. But no, not from her. I considered replying something snarky, something like, wow, family reunion energy hitting different this year. But I didn't. I didn't type anything at all. Instead, I just stood there on my front porch, holding a cake box in one hand and my phone in the other, like a woman who had walked into a play she didn't audition for. I was locked out, on the day of the family party, by my own mother. That's when the tears threatened. Not from shock, but from the kind of humiliation that sits low and sharp in your chest. I wasn't just kicked out of a house, I was erased. I didn't go to the party. Instead, I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before ending up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner just off the highway. I called Maya, my closest friend, and choked out what had happened. She told me to come over immediately. I didn't even argue, because right then, I didn't need explanations. I needed shelter. Maya didn't ask questions when I showed up at her apartment just after sunset, cake still in hand, eyes red and rimmed with salt. She just opened the door, wrapped me in a blanket soft hug, and led me inside. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, but as soon as I saw the quiet safety of her space, I crumbled. We sat on her couch in silence for a while. The lemon cake sat unopened on the counter, like a relic from a version of my life that no longer existed. They really changed the locks? She asked finally. I nodded, and left a text. Just cold. No warning, no call, nothing. She frowned, crossing her arms. That's not just cruel, it's calculated. I hadn't let myself go there yet, but the words stuck. Calculated. Later that night, after Maya went to bed and I lay awake on her pull-out couch, I kept replaying the moment I stepped onto my porch, but something else had started gnawing at me. I never got to check inside. What did they take? What did they leave? The next morning, I drove back to the Housenot to break in, just to look, to confirm that it wasn't some twisted misunderstanding, that I hadn't imagined it all in the haze of travel, fatigue, and betrayal. That's when I saw them. 3 large black trash bags tucked behind the shrubs along the side of the house. They were carelessly tied, half slumped over like forgotten luggage. I parked across the street, heart pounding, and walked over. Inside the first bag, clothes. My clothes. Wrinkled, crumpled, and shoved in like donation bin leftovers. The second, toiletries. Half. Used bottles of shampoo. My toothbrush holder. Even the mug I used for tea every morning, the one with a crack near the handle. The third bag hurt the most. Books. Framed photos. A necklace my grandmother had given me when I graduated from college. It was still in the box, now lying sideways among loose postcards and a torn journal page. They hadn't just kicked me out. They'd packed up my life and dumped it on the lawn like garbage. I stood there, fingers trembling, staring at the pieces of myself they'd decided didn't belong. Passersby might have thought I was just rummaging for something I lost, but I knew better. This wasn't loss. This was a message. I took the bags and left without knocking, without calling, without texting back. If they wanted silence, I'd give it to them. But not the kind they expected. Not the silence of surrender. The silence that plans. By Monday morning, something in me had hardened. I wasn't sure when exactly it happened, maybe while dragging trash bags filled with my memories into Maya's tiny apartment, or maybe in the long silence that followed the realization. They never thought I'd fight back. They counted on the version of me who apologized too quickly, who backed down to keep the peace, who mistook their control for tradition. But that version of me no longer existed. I skipped work that morning and sat at Maya's kitchen table, laptop open, hands steady. I didn't need to find revenge. I already had it. Because last year, after my grandmother passed and the probate paperwork settled, I had been asked by my mother to temporarily manage the Collins Family Memorial Fund, a small charitable fund named in my grandmother's honor. It was meant to support local nonprofits, and because I worked in finance, they trusted me to keep it organized. I agreed, and like everything else I take on, I did it thoroughly. I made copies. I backed up emails. I flagged discrepancies, hundreds of dollars here, a few thousand there, always explained away by my mother with vague references to expenses or upcoming donations. Something felt off, but I didn't press. I didn't want to create conflict. But now? Now I wanted answers. I pulled up the Drive folder I'd saved months ago. PDFs of monthly bank statements, scanned checks, annotated emails. One message stood out. A forwarded invoice from a contractor that was clearly fake. Another document. A check issued to a consultant, Derek's college roommate, who hadn't worked in nonprofit consulting a day in his life. I felt my breath catch. This wasn't just carelessness. It was fraud. Tax-deductible fraud. Under a dead woman's name. I reached out to an attorney I had met through a women's finance panel the year before. Her name was Elise Parksharp, precise, terrifying in the best way. She took my call immediately, and I walked her through everything. The eviction, the bags, the fund, the inheritance. When I finished, she said two things. First, what your family did is illegal. You're the registered deed holder. Changing the locks and removing your belongings is unlawful exclusion, sometimes called self-help eviction. And we can act on it immediately. Second, if your documents about the memorial fund are real and they look real, you're not just dealing with a civil issue. Your mother could be facing a financial investigation. I was silent for a beat. Elise continued, gently this time. I know this is painful, but we need to protect you first, legally and financially. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I'm ready. She drafted a cease and desist letter that same afternoon, filed for an emergency injunction to regain property access, and requested formal copies of the will and deed from probate court. Her last instruction. If they try to contact you, don't engage. Let them panic. It took less than 48 hours. On Wednesday morning, while I was reviewing the injunction filing with Elise, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. A smooth voice came through. Male, older. Miss Collins, this is David Lerner. I represent your mother, Linda Collins. I believe you've recently retained legal counsel? I didn't respond. He continued, voice tight beneath a layer of forced calm. We're hoping to resolve a small misunderstanding regarding the Riverview property. My clients are open to discussion and wish to avoid unnecessary escalation. There it was. The panic. I smiled, though no one could see it. Please have your office email my attorney, Elise Park, I said. She's handling everything from this point forward. Miss Collins, he said, more urgent now. I think it would be in everyone's best interest to fix this, urgently. Fix this. After all they'd done, they wanted to fix it. But some things don't break. Some things wake up. The meeting was held in a neutral office, downtown, glass walls, gray carpet, the kind of corporate sterility designed to keep emotions contained. Elise had warned me, stay calm, be direct, they'll try to twist the narrative, don't flinch. I didn't flinch. Linda Collins' mother arrived in a tailored gray blazer that still couldn't cover the strain in her face. My brother, Derek, walked behind her, head slightly bowed. They were joined by their attorney, David Lerner, the man from the phone call. Elise sat beside me, composed, unreadable. No one greeted anyone. We got straight to it. Elise, Lerner began with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My clients would like to offer a path forward in amicable resolution, with minimal public scrutiny or legal involvement. Elise gave a polite nod. We're listening. He slid a document across the table. They're willing to return access to the Riverview property and to cover any reasonable legal costs incurred thus far. In exchange, Miss Collins agrees not to pursue further action or make public claims about certain internal family matters, particularly those involving the Collins Memorial Fund. I didn't touch the paper. Instead, I spoke for the first time. No. Linda stiffened. Avery, don't be dramatic. I turned to look at her. You changed the locks on a house you don't own. You threw out my belongings. You made a public post implying I betrayed our family. That's not a misunderstanding. That's malicious. Derek's eyes flicked toward me, then down at the table. Lerner cleared his throat. Let's focus on moving forward. What is it you're requesting, Miss Collins? I unfolded my own sheet of paper. Elise had typed it up that morning. I slid it across the table, slow and steady. My conditions, I said. Full restoration of access and possession of the Riverview house, immediately. A written retraction and public apology for the defamatory statements made online. Full reimbursement for legal fees, temporary housing, and damages to personal property. Formal relinquishment of any claim, financial, emotional, or symbolic, on the Collins Memorial Fund. Agreement that Linda and Derek Collins will not enter or approach the property without written invitation. Linda scoffed. You think you can keep us away from our own family's house? It's not yours, I said, quiet and calm. It never was. Lerner scanned the paper, then looked at Elise. And if we refuse? Elise didn't even blink. Then we proceed. Our client has evidence of financial misconduct under a charitable fund named after a deceased relative. The legal and reputational fallout would be substantial. Linda went pale. Derek shifted uncomfortably. You're threatening your own mother, she hissed. No, I said, meeting her eyes. I'm setting boundaries, the kind you never respected. The room fell into tense silence. Then Lerner spoke again, this time with forced diplomacy. We'll need a moment to confer privately. Elise and I stepped into the hallway. She glanced sideways at me. You did good in there. I don't feel good, I admitted. That's normal, she said. But you're in control now. And they know it. The locksmith was already there when I arrived. Elise insisted on bringing a third-party professional and a police escort, just in case. It felt dramatic, but after what had happened, I wasn't taking chances. My name was now on a judge-signed injunction that declared I was the sole rightful occupant of the Riverview house. Legally, it was mine again. Emotionally, I wasn't so sure. As the locksmith worked on the door, I stood on the porch, staring at the place that once meant safety, the wraparound railing I had sanded by hand. The chipped mailbox I couldn't bring myself to replace because it still bore my grandmother's handwriting in faded Sharpie. Everything looked the same from the outside. Inside, it was a different story. The air was still, as if the house had been holding its breath. But something was missing. Not one thing, everything. Gone were the copper pots that had hung above the stove since I was 5. Gone was the hand-painted quilt my grandmother had made, which once hung proudly above the staircase. Even the framed family photos had disappeared, blank outlines on the walls where sunlight hadn't yet reached. Room by room, I walked through the hollow shell of what had once been a home. The worst was the study. My grandmother's desk or sanctuary had been cleared out entirely. The drawers were empty. Her journals, the ones she kept since 1978, were gone. So was the antique lamp I'd spent a fortune rewiring, and the tiny ceramic owl she used as a paperweight. Missing, too, was the silver locket she always kept in her drawer, with a picture of me as a baby. I sat in the corner of the room, knees to my chest, not crying, just stunned. I felt like a stranger walking through a museum of loss. The police officer accompanying us shifted awkwardly by the front door. You may want to file a separate theft report, he said gently. We can't force them to return anything without documentation, but this doesn't look accidental. Elise snapped photos on her phone, documenting every bare wall, every missing item. They looted it, I said finally. My voice sounded far away. They took everything that made it mine. No, Elise replied. They took what they could carry, but what made it yours is still here. I wanted to believe her, but right then, all I felt was cold. That night, I slept on a bare mattress, no sheets, no pillow, no comfort, just silence. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just stared at the ceiling and let the emptiness sit beside me. They thought they had stripped this place of its meaning, but they didn't understand something essential. This house wasn't sacred because of what was in it. It was sacred because of who had trusted me to protect it. And I still plan to honor that trust no matter how much they took. The first thing I brought back into the house wasn't furniture. It was a framed photo of my grandmother. I placed it on the empty mantel in the living room, just above the faint rectangular shadow where a larger painting used to hang. The photo was from my college graduation, her arm linked in mine, both of us laughing, eyes crinkled with pride. I hadn't realized until then how deeply I needed her presence again. The house was quiet, but not dead. And slowly, I began to fill it not with things, but with purpose. I contacted a small team of women I'd met through a financial literacy nonprofit. I used to volunteer with mostly retirees and single moms, women rebuilding their lives after divorce, illness, or loss. I told them I had a space, a big one, quiet, historic, and waiting for something meaningful. By the end of the month, we had our first meeting in what used to be my grandmother's parlor. No art on the walls, folding chairs, a coffee pot borrowed from Maya. But we were there, and we were talking about budgeting, credit scores, student debt, wills, and dreams. It felt right. Word spread. Neighbors dropped by with baked goods. One woman brought her teenage daughter and asked if I'd help her apply for a scholarship. Another woman left a note under my door. "Your grandmother helped me once. I think she'd love what you're doing here." It wasn't a business, it wasn't a charity, it was something in between a reclaiming. The more I poured into the space, the less haunted it felt. I repainted the kitchen the same pale yellow it was when I was a kid. I planted rosemary and sage outside the window. I replaced the stripped study with bookshelves and added a small reading corner. Not to replicate what was lost, but to honor it and move forward. Professionally, my life stabilized too. My boss, who had heard rumors during the legal fallout, called me back into a major client project. "We want your eye on this," he said. "You've got grit." I smiled. He had no idea. And Maya? She remained my lifeline. She showed up with rugs, lamps, care packages, and that irreverent humor that reminded me I was more than what had been taken from me. I didn't speak to my mother or Derek during that time. Not a word, not a message. But I knew they heard. Because silence, when it's rooted in strength, is deafening. One evening, standing in the front parlor after everyone had left, I caught my reflection in the newly polished glass of the window. The room behind me was warm, full of quiet energy and second chances. I touched the mantel, just below my grandmother's photo, and whispered, "It's mine now, and I'm finally ready to carry it." Spring returned to Riverview the way it always did, slowly, with a few false starts and one final, bitter frost. But when the daffodils bloomed along the edge of the porch and the wind shifted from biting to soft, I knew the time had come. 1 year after I'd found myself locked out of my own home, I hosted a gathering of my own. No official invitations, no engraved place cards, no guilt-fueled obligations. Just a group of people who had stood beside me when everything else fell apart. Maya, Elise, the women from our financial circles, a few kind neighbors, and a retired librarian who'd taught me how to catalog things when I was 10. We lit candles, brought potluck dishes, laughed until we cried in the very same living room where silence had once pressed against my chest like a weight. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was mine. As dusk settled, I stepped onto the porch to catch my breath. That's when I saw them. My mother and Derek stood just beyond the gate. They didn't enter, just stood there, framed by the lilac bushes my grandmother had planted. Derek looked uncertain. My mother clutched her purse like it was armor. "Avery," she called, her voice softer than I remembered. We didn't know you were having people over." I didn't move. I didn't wave. Instead, I walked to the top of the porch steps and waited. We heard about the work you've been doing, she continued. The community programs, the renovation. Your grandmother would be proud. There it was her attempt at peace. But not an apology, not even an acknowledgement of what she had done. I met her eyes. She is proud, I know. Derek looked up at me then. We've been talking about maybe starting over. I took a long breath, then stepped down a single stair, close enough that they could hear me clearly. I rebuilt this home from the ground up, I said, my voice steady. And I rebuilt myself too. What you did, it broke something. Not just between us, but inside me. My mother blinked quickly, but her expression didn't shift. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I'm also not the daughter you thought would always come back. They said nothing. So I did what I had to do. I wish you peace. But this, I gestured gently behind me to the warm light spilling from the windows, the laughter, the food, the music. This is family now. I didn't slam the door. I didn't turn away in bitterness. I simply walked back inside. And I let the door close behind me. Later that night, as the last guests filtered out and the house grew quiet again, I sat in the reading chair by the fireplace, my grandmother's favorite spot. On the mantel, her photo glowed softly in the flickering light. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something better. Free. Free from needing approval that was never mine to earn. Free from stories written by others, full of guilt and obedience. Free to claim not just a house, but a life. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood. They had locked me out. But I had built the key. And I had come home.